True Crime Files tries to come up with interesting cases that you'd like to know a little bit more about or what happened behind the scenes. And today's case is one of those. This is Michael Jackson's death. And it involves Dr. Conrad Murray. A lot of things you may not have heard of or not aware of that we'll be talking about. So I think you'll find it interesting. Now, if you want to make sure you are aware of all of our episodes of True Crime Files of Los Angeles, subscribe. Otherwise, we generally have a new episode every Friday at 3 o'clock. So let's get into the case we want to talk about today. Well, what is our topic today? Michael Jackson's death, better known as the Dr. Conrad Murray case. Well, let's go back to March 2009 for London, and as regards to Michael Jackson's tour, he was going to do This Is It performances over in London in the O2 Arena. It's a very, very large venue where they do the concerts and performers perform, and he was scheduled to do 10 concerts there. And when they put the tickets on sale, they all sold out immediately. So AEG, the production company, decided, well, let's do 50 of them. We can do 50 and make a lot of money. The only problem was Michael up to the task of doing 50 concerts. To make it easy on Michael, they decided to have the rehearsals in Los Angeles at the Staples Center, which is run by AEG. They would build the sets there, they'd get all the special effects, they would work on the music there, and it would also allow Michael to do the rehearsals there. So I'm going to direct your attention to June 24th, 2009. It's about 10 p.m., and Michael shows up for the rehearsal. Now he's 3 hours late, but he gets there, he does the singing, he does the dance routine. Everything goes quite well for about 2 hours, but then he's tired and he indicates he wants to go home. So he has a driver then take him back to his house. He's staying at a rental house on the west side of Beverly Hills in the Los Angeles area. He, as well as his 3 children, are living there, and they have security, and they have a chef and several nannies that take care of the children. So life is going well for Michael. However, he has problems sleeping, a lot of difficulty sleeping, and he knows that if he can't get sleep, he's not going to be able to do these performances in London. So he makes an agreement with AG, the production company, to hire a doctor, a private doctor who will help him sleep. And they agree to do it, and they pay that doctor $150,000 per month to take care of Michael as to sleeping. Now, they were using what was called propofol, and Michael liked it because he got him to sleep. And the night in question we're going to talk about, the early morning hours around 3 o'clock, Dr. Murray gave Michael a drip of propofol, and it worked. He was able to fall asleep very quickly, and Dr. Murray sat there next to the bed watching Michael. And it wasn't until about 10 o'clock in the morning that the doctor decided that he wanted to go to the restroom. So he got up and he walked out of the master bedroom down the way to the bathroom, and he was gone for maybe 10 minutes, he says, and then he returned. And when he returned, he noticed that Michael wasn't breathing. He was not moving at all, and that panicked him. Didn't know what was going on. So he immediately started CPR on the bed and tried to do compressions on Michael's heart to revive him, and it wasn't working. And so eventually he ran downstairs. You can see the stairs here, and the chef was down there, any complainers said that something's wrong with Michael, I need help. And so the security people were alerted, and also the personal assistant of Michael was called. He wasn't there, but he was at his residence, and he called back, talked to the doctor, and the doctor said Michael's had some type of bad reaction to the drugs, and told him to come on over. And so the assistant did come over, but in the meantime, the security staff was alerted, and one of the security members went upstairs to the master bedroom and saw Michael lying motionless on the bed. But the children were, starting to be concerned, and Paris was crying, and the children were kind of screaming, "What's happening to Dad? What's happening to Dad?" And what was kind of interesting was the security, remember, he's there, and the doctor comes over to him and says, "Pick up the vials, get those vials on the nightstand." And he did what the doctor told him to do. He picked up these vials, and he was told to place them in a bag, and he did. So while doing that, he noticed that there were several propofol vials on the floor, which he hadn't seen before. He hadn't paid attention to it. He picked those up as well. And then he was told to contact the paramedics. And it most likely was a little after noon, maybe 12:24, 25, somewhere there. The security officer called 911, and he stated, this is what he said: "A gentleman here who needs help, and he's not breathing." And so the dispatcher said, "Okay, I'll send somebody out." Now that was the first time that anyone knew that Michael Jackson was in some type of trouble. So it took the paramedics, maybe up to 10 minutes or so to arrive. So most likely it was about 12:30 in the afternoon. The paramedics, they rushed upstairs to the master bedroom, and they could see the doctor is frantic. He's running around. He's trying to say, Michael, I don't know what's wrong with him. He must have been exhausted from the rehearsals. So the paramedics, they take their equipment and they start to see if they can get any pulse or if they can get any reaction from Michael. And the doctor eventually says, "Well, I gave him a sedative, lorazepam." But the doctor never said a word about giving him propofol. So the paramedics, they spent time trying to revive Michael, and for 42 minutes they worked on him, giving compressions, trying to give oxygen, but nothing is working. Nothing is working. So they decide to have him transported to UCLA Medical Center. Now, it isn't too far away from the house. It most likely is maybe a mile and a half. So they put Michael in the ambulance and drive him over to the medical center, and he's taken out, put on a gurney, and brought into the ER. Now, it most likely is about 1:40, somewhere about that time. The ER physician comes out and looks at Michael, and she tries to find a pulse. She's trying to see if there's any sign of life, and she declares him dead. But Dr. Murray didn't like that. He said, no, keep working on him. And so they did. They tried to see if they could revive him. But eventually the doctor said, no, he is dead. And to her, it appeared that he had been dead for quite some time. At the same time, there was a cardiologist who came into the ER room and examined Michael. And at that point, Dr. Murray says, I gave him lorazepam, and didn't mention anything about giving Michael propofol. So this is, as I say, about 1:40, maybe it's 1:45, getting close to 2 o'clock. By that time, Dr. Murray is now talking to the personal assistant. He says, well, you got to do something. And he says to him in a quiet voice, Brother Michael has some cream in the house that I know he wouldn't want the world to know about. Well, the personal assistant didn't know what he was talking about, so he said, okay, I'll go over to the house, I'll check it out, and I'll see if I can find it. But at the same time, Dr. Murray, he is going out the exit, the rear of the hospital, and he leaves. He doesn't talk to the police. He doesn't talk to any of the other doctors. Now, he was the attending physician when Michael died, but he isn't there to sign off on the cause of death. So now what is going to happen? Well, it means that, someone's going to have to make a determination, the cause of death without the physician. So about 2:26 was when Jermaine Jackson came to the podium there at the hospital and made the announcement to the world that his brother, Michael Jackson, was dead. Well, that came as a shock to everyone. And in the meantime, the word had gotten out, and the hospital was surrounded by Michael Jackson fans. And the hospital realized that they weren't going to be able to drive his body to the coroner's office. So they ordered a helicopter from the sheriff's department to come in. It picked up Michael's body and flew it over to the coroner's office on North Mission Road in East Los Angeles. Now, in the meantime, LAPD had gone to Michael's residence, and they'd gone in there and asked permission to check things out because they were concerned about what medication was he taking at the time that he died. So they're going upstairs to the master bedroom, and they're looking around, and they see a drip system, an IV drip system next to the bed. And then they notice there were a lot of non-prescription vials on the various tables in the bedroom. And then they saw propofol. There were several containers of propofol, some on the floor and some on the table. Also, they checked out the oxygen tanks in the bedroom, and they were all empty. Those were empty. However, when they went out to the pool shed, they found that there were a number of oxygen tanks, and those ones were full. So as they looked around, they found a huge number of vials of various medications, and they were in various rooms, and they had names. Michael's name on some of them, but other names that they were not familiar with. And they were by several different doctors, not just one doctor or two doctors, but several doctors had prescribed the various medications. Now, when they went downstairs, they were continuing to look for medication, and they noticed how hot it was. The house was, the furnace was on, it was so hot in there, and every room they went in, they found in the closets, various places, medication, tablets, vials. All right, so they're trying to determine, okay, what was Michael taking when he died? So they seized some of the drugs that were there, and they got some of the equipment, the medical equipment that was being used. But they also noticed that the doctor's car was in the courtyard there, and of course he wasn't around. So they got a tow truck to come tow the doctor's car away, and they noticed that there were vials of medication in the back of his car. So that was what was going on, and it was getting close to maybe 9 o'clock, and they all left. Now the next morning, the detectives returned to the house, and it most likely was about 10 o'clock, it might have been 9:45, they arrived there, and to their surprise, the detectives noticed that it was lined with moving vans, moving trucks, all along the street in front of Michael's house. And when they went into the house, everything was gone. All of Michael's personal belongings and everything that had been in that bedroom was missing. It was gone. The rental house was completely empty except for some rental furniture that was still there. Why was everything taken, and taken in less than 24 hours? Well, the police really want to talk to the doctor, Dr. Murray, as to what is this all about? What's going on here? Now, he has an attorney in Texas, and they try to contact that attorney, and they eventually learn that Ed Chernoff was going to be the attorney representing the doctor. And so they talk to the attorney, and he says, well, I've advised him not to talk to the police at this time until I have an opportunity to talk to him and find out more about the case. So that was what was going on. So the detectives figured they weren't going to be able to hear from the doctor. However, it was later that day, and it might have been getting close to the evening time, the police got a call from the attorney, and he says, yeah, we'd be more than happy to talk to you. We'll talk to you tomorrow at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Marina del Rey. So it was all set up that the attorney, Dr. Murray, as well as the detectives from LAPD would all be together there at that hotel, and they did. They all met, and the head detective, Scott Smith, advised Dr. Murray his constitutional rights, and he agreed to talk with his attorney being present. So they sat down and talked about what was going on. Now, Dr. Murray makes a number of statements to the detectives, and they are kind of inconsistent, but the first one he said was around 1 o'clock, Mr. Jackson complained he was dehydrated and couldn't sleep, and I gave him 3 different types of anti-anxiety drugs and to try to help him sleep. Then the doctor continued to explain that he gave him some other medication. He says, I usually gave Mr. Jackson 50 milligrams of propofol diluted with lidocaine in a drip system. And then he talked about that date in particular, and he said, I gave him 3 sedatives, throughout the early morning hours, but Michael was unable to sleep, and he begged for propofol, and I gave him 25 milligrams of propofol at around 3 o'clock. And then he said he remained next to Michael, next to his bed. He sat there as Michael fell asleep, and it wasn't until maybe it was 10:30, he said, I stepped out of the room to go to the restroom. And he said I was gone for approximately 10 minutes. So now they're getting the story about Dr. Murray leaving Michael Jackson. And then he goes on to say, when I returned at around 11 o'clock, when I went in the bedroom, I noticed that Mr. Jackson was not breathing. I immediately attempted CPR on the bed. I couldn't get Michael to the floor. Now the detectives are going, wait, what is going on here? Michael weighed about 90 pounds at that time, and the doctor was 6'5". So how could he not be able to lift Michael up and put him on the floor where he could properly do CPR? So that was kind of a strange statement. Now after they had talked for maybe 2 hours, or might have been almost 3 hours at that hotel, that was it, and they all left. And then the detectives wanted to, really look into it to see, who is this Dr. Murray? Is he legitimate? And they found out, yeah, he's a cardiologist, not a sleep doctor. He wasn't in the business of treating insomnia, but as a cardiologist, he had a practice in Houston. He had a clinic in Las Vegas and also Los Angeles, yes, all over, a number of locations. So after the police had conducted all of their investigation, interviewed everybody, they wrote up the reports and they presented it to the district attorney's office as to what charges should be brought against Dr. Murray, if any? Should it be a second-degree murder? Or how about an involuntary manslaughter? Well, in order to decide that, we need to know what are the elements of those two charges. Second-degree murder requires implied malice, an intentional act, dangerous to the life, deliberate, and a conscious disregard for life. So those are the elements for second-degree murder. But involuntary manslaughter doesn't require as much. It's just a high degree of risk of death or injury without due caution and circumspection. But what is the main difference between the two? Well, second-degree murder, the sentence could be 15 to life. However, for involuntary manslaughter, it would only be 2 to 4 years. So those are the differences between the two. And the trial was conducted on September 24th, 2011 by Judge Michael Pastor. The jury was made up of 7 men, 5 women, and I remember I took these pictures of the Jackson family. Every day they would come to the trial, and it was like a circus atmosphere. There were thousands of Michael Jackson fans that surrounded the courthouse just to watch the Jackson family go into the court building. The first witness who testified was the coroner investigator, and she testified that when she went up to the master bedroom, she found an empty vial of propofol on the floor right next to the bed, and she picked it up and seized it. And there were a number of doctors who came in and talked about propofol. It is a great drug for doing surgery. What it does, it decreases the respiratory rate, and it also lowers the blood pressure, and then on top of that it slows the heart rate. So it's for surgery. This is something that you would want to give the patient to knock them out, and you can bring them back to life very quickly when the operation is over. So that's what it's used for. But if it's being used, it has to be done in a hospital setting, because you need certain equipment to monitor that patient, their vitals. You have to have an EKG machine, and then on top of that you have to have a pulse oximeter, and then oxygen mask, because you've got to give the person oxygen at various stages. None of that equipment existed in Michael's bedroom or anywhere in the rental house that he was living in. Now, we had several doctors, cardiologists, anesthesiologists, who came in and testified to propofol. They said it's always used in a hospital setting because it has to be monitored. You have to monitor the patient. And they all stress that you never, ever leave a patient alone once you've given a propofol. You want to monitor all of their vitals. Now, they wanted to find out more about Dr. Murray and what was he doing for the time that he left. And we checked his cell phone, and when we checked the cell phone, we found out for 47 minutes he was making phone calls to various people. And those phone calls were made to his various girlfriends. He had girlfriends all over the place. There was one that he talked to in Houston. One of them was in Las Vegas. Another one was, I think it was Northern California, and then one in Los Angeles. He called every one of these girlfriends, and he talked to them for up to, we know, 47 minutes on his cell phone. That is the time that Michael Jackson died, when he wasn't being monitored as his breathing. Now, the coroner's finding. Now, this is Dr. Rogers. I worked with him on a number of homicide cases. Excellent, very knowledgeable. And he ruled that death was a homicide. And he said that substandard treatment in using propofol to treat insomnia in a home setting without proper monitoring equipment was deadly. And it was in this case. And at time of argument, the prosecutor, Dave Walgren, this is what he argued, that Dr. Murray didn't follow the standard of care of a patient. He gave propofol without proper monitoring. And as a matter of fact, he left the patient unattended after giving him propofol. Now, the defense attorney got in there and he argued that there was nothing wrong, that Dr. Murray gave a therapeutic dose of propofol that can be done in various settings. And then he said the prosecution hasn't proven their case. So that was pretty much the defense argument. Now, the results of the trial were kind of interesting. Was that it was tried in the criminal courts building downtown. The jury deliberated 2 days, and eventually they came back with a unanimous verdict of guilty, that the doctor was guilty of involuntary manslaughter. That was the finding of the jury. Now, next was the sentencing, and that was kind of interesting when it came to time for sentencing. The judge said, Dr. Murray, you showed and you haven't shown any remorse in this matter at all. And that judge gave him a maximum of 4 years in prison. You know, when you think about it, such an unnecessary loss of a human being, of Michael Jackson, such a talented individual. His music impacted so many lives throughout the world. People loved his music, and his music will live forever, even though he is not going to be able to live forever. And just to talk about his background, Michael was born and grew up in Gary, Indiana. It was a very humble beginning, but it was a family that loved music. Music was important to everyone in the family. And his sisters, they liked music. Rebbe, Toya, Janet Jackson, they all liked it. But what was famous was the Jackson Five, the brothers, all of the brothers, and it all centered around Michael, who was the youngest one of the group. Now, they became famous back in 1983. They performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they were recognized as being quite the performers. Now, Michael went on his own after his brothers, and he did very, very well. He did so many albums, famous albums. Beat It and Thriller was one of the top albums of all times. Billie Jean, Bad, Dangerous, and it just went on and on and on. Famous albums that people loved, Black and White. So it had quite an impact on millions and millions of people. So upon his death, there was a memorial at Staples Center commemorating his life and his contribution to music. Now, his casket was brought into Staples Center, and there were all these stars, music stars, motion picture stars, writers, and everybody wanted to be there, be part of the tribute to Michael Jackson for his contribution to the world of music. And what was so touching about it all was really what was at the very end. At the very end, his daughter, Paris, came up to the microphone and said these words: "Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. I just want to say, I love him so much." There wasn't a dry eye in the entire Staples Center as a result of that. Well, Michael was buried at Forest Lawn, and it's in the Holly Terrace where his tomb is, and thousands and thousands of people visit there every year just to be where Michael was buried. Now, what has happened to his children? You know, there's Prince, Paris, and Blanket. Well, they grew up. You know, some of us weren't paying attention as they were growing up and changing. And just think of the brother and sister, look at them, becoming young adults. And as a matter of fact, you know, Paris, what has she been doing? Well, she's changed. She's not the little girl that we remember from the Staples Center. Took on a life of her own, even though we all remember her grieving for her father, Michael Jackson. So life goes on, and the Michael Jackson story is interesting. And I wrote a book, Celebrity Curse. And in many respects, Michael Jackson lived the celebrity curse. He had a wonderful life, wonderful children, but it all ended very tragic for him. So if you want to know more information about the Dr. Murray case, get my book, Celebrity Curse. Very, very interesting. Now, hopefully you will join us next time for another True Crime Files podcast when we take on another case and discuss it and review it by Ronald E. Bowers. So see you next time.